again, can everybody hear? Yes. Well, I hope you enjoyed the film. Just to reintroduce, you have their bios in the brochure, but to my immediate left is Celso Perez from the ACLU, also formerly Human Rights Watch, and Andrew Lin from the New American Economy, who also was a guest speaker at our last Indocumentales event. I should mention, as many of you know, the Unafraid had been originally scheduled for March 4th, I think was the date. Celso was our scheduled speaker at that time, and he was kind enough to join us again on a Saturday, as well as all of you. So, you know, this film leaves us with what was the situation in 2017. Here we are 2 years later. I was hoping, Celso, you could kind of walk us into where are we today, and maybe a little bit about what the ACLU and your project in particular is doing to address the issue.
Sure. So in terms of the legal situation, I think one of the last scenes or last, I don't know, the text shows that the program was ended in 2017. So in brief, what happened in 2017 that the program was ended in that no new applications or no new DACA applications are being accepted. There's been a number of legal challenges across the country, and in brief, they have succeeded in allowing individuals who previously had DACA to continue extending their DACA. The way DACA works is individuals, or is it helpful to explain what DACA is, or I don't know what level of...
Is it helpful to explain what DACA is? No need to... No?
Okay. Okay. So then the way the program works is you essentially get the benefit for 2 years and you have to renew it. So what's happened since 2017 is that the courts have essentially enjoined the rescission for people who already had DACA. So people can keep renewing their DACA, but no new people can join DACA. Our part, I would say, is relatively minor, and this has been a sort of a nationwide effort. We have participated as part of that, and one of the cases that we have brought really challenges denials of DACA that have been for legal reasons unjustified. So people who've been terminated DACA with no real explanation by the government. That sort of has been our way to contribute to the broader set of legal challenges.
Thank you, Celso. And maybe just one thing, and either one of you could feel welcome to answer this if you have the answer. Obviously, a big concern that comes through is that people are exposing themselves. And when we first started this program Indocumentales 10 years ago and would be interviewing many people who were undocumented, there was still this tension, okay, am I going to have my name listed when I'm being interviewed? Been here in this room, are you going to be on camera? The movement of the Dreamers sort of changed that to some extent, but it's still a legitimate risk, which everyone in this film feels strongly. Do we have knowledge about the extent to which family members, for example, of DACA recipients have been targeted? How has that been playing out?
Well, it's a huge risk. I mean, and these people are incredibly brave, not only to make that movie, but to live their daily lives. As I think was alluded to several times in the film, the government has this information. It's hard to identify sort of a strict policy of the government using this data to go after people, but certainly in my experience, not so much with the ACLU, but when I was in private practice prior to that, there are certainly similar programs where people are expected to present themselves to immigration every certain time when they've received similar deferred action, and the government's policy has definitely changed. So people that before were on what are called orders of supervision, OSUP for short, you present yourself every X months, and there is sort of an implicit understanding that the government will not deport you. No, there's definitely been targeting of people in that, you know, maybe you've been doing this for 7 years, 10 years, and there was this understanding that you wouldn't be deported. In the current administration, that has definitely changed. A lot of these programs are discretionary, and so the executive has the authority and the ability to change those policies with very little protection for individuals.
Thank you. Andrew?
And I think it's important to add that the idea of Dreamers and DACA has been around for much longer than since 2012. In 2001 really is when the first idea, or at least in legislative form as a bill, came around, and it was a bipartisan bill. So this idea has been thrown around a lot. But so when DACA was finally sort of created in 2012, there were estimates about how many people were eligible in theory based on that criteria. And that number was around 1.3 million people. If you think about the peak number of people that actually held DACA, it's much lower than that. And so you're still seeing that perhaps element of fear of exposing yourself by having the status that lets you do things, out in the open legally. And I know that one of the last cards that they put up in the film said that in 2017, it put 800,000 people at risk. The latest numbers that I've seen from the end of 2018, the number is actually much lower. That people actually still hold DACA. It's around 700,000. I think it's just under 700,000. So that's 100,000 less people that now have this ability to work legally and to have a driver's license, etc. So whether that's because they perhaps didn't want to renew because the situation and the atmosphere in the country has changed, or maybe they found another way, or there are other reasons. But I think the rhetoric suggests otherwise.
And Andrew, one of the during one of the protests, you see this statement about, okay, what are undocumented people actually contributing to the economy? It's been a theme, but somehow it hasn't seemed to permeate the collective understanding. So since you're dealing with these numbers on a daily basis, could you kind of give us the reality of economic contributions?
Yeah. So, for the DACA eligible population in particular, we looked at their economic contributions, and as having the right to legally work, they're also obligated to pay taxes. So they are significant economic contributors. So we looked at the census data from the American Community Survey. In 2017, DACA eligible people earned $23.4 billion, which allowed them to pay a total of $4 billion in taxes, both to the federal government, but also to state and local governments. And so, sort of, if you look at their spending power after they've paid taxes from their income, that's more than $19 billion, and that's money that is then sort of redistributed or recirculated into local economies, and so it's supporting local businesses, creating new jobs, all these kinds of things. And so, when you think about the value, if you want to put a monetary number on that, it's quite significant.
Do you have any ideas to why that there still seems to be this kind of, it's a very effective tool to say, oh, people are taking from the country and are, the entitlements argument as opposed to the reality of the economic contribution? I mean, you both work with different organizations that have influential board members and so on. How is it that the media hasn't been able to really communicate that message effectively in your perspective?
So in the work that we do, and so New American Economy is sort of dedicated to bringing this economic focus to the immigration debate as using it in a way that sort of finds a common ground in the middle, so both sides can sort of come to a rational, less emotional conversation. And oftentimes we do run into these myths. Immigrants take away jobs. They don't pay taxes. But I think as you kind of heard in the hearing that they had in the Georgia Senate or whatever it was in committee, DACA people are documented. You have their details. They do work. And you know very well, depending on what state you live in, what kind of benefits are afforded them. And in many cases and in many states, undocumented immigrants, as you saw with his father's health scare or health condition, there's very little that is offered to them. And so they are working, they're paying taxes through ITINs, but they're not really able to reap the benefits for when need arises. And oftentimes when we work with local communities, there is some of that backlash, but I think there's a lot of misinformation. I think it's also perhaps simpler to repeat what you've been told. And you know, the information isn't that readily available. I think it's sort of beyond most people's, you know, desire to look for that kind of information.
So I'll just add two things. One is this always reminds me of this online meme. I think it's called something like Schrodinger's immigrant, where immigrants are at once taking away jobs and being a drain on the economy and the welfare state, which I mean, I don't, it's not something I study or know personally, but it just strikes me as a very apt, meme. It's really a meme of how, it's mind-boggling that immigrants manage to do both things at once. So that's the first point. The second point, it's definitely become a lot harder, and there have been other measures that the current administration has put in place. One having to do with the petition process. And public assistance in the petition and the green card process, in that the regulations affecting what kind of public benefits individuals can access to then be eligible for immigration benefits are currently under revision, and sort of as a way of even further limiting individuals who are in any sort of immigration process.
And I will say with that change the administration has made, one of their conditions among many is this idea of you know, the income your family or your household should have. And the bar that they've set is actually above the average median income when you adjust by number of people in your household of the entire US. So it's really, you know, doing things by the book, as they would say, applying the rules that have already been there, but doing it in a way that I think is in bad faith.
At this point, I'd love to invite those of you who are joining us to share your comments and questions. We can continue here as well, but there's no question that shouldn't be asked, please.
Hi, good evening. Actually, this is not a question, it's just a comment. Thank you so much for inviting us to participate tonight. It's a wonderful film, very touching. I'm from El Salvador, and it's my personal concern that Central Americans are always left out of this narrative. It's challenging for us to be compared to Mexicans. It is not offense, I do respect my brothers and sisters from Mexico. But it happens that we have another narrative. We come from countries that went through civil war in the 80s. People don't talk about that openly. And yet, they dislike to say aloud that the US intervened, manipulate, donate a lot of money and weapons, and as of today, after 4 years, people keep coming. And we are not taking into consideration. We don't talk only about DACA, we talk also about TPS recipients, besides the undocumented people. I worked for 10 years for a member of Congress, and that was my personal call. Unfortunately, those guys who are involved with activism, they get involved because either it's important to them or because they were like, hey, calm and gentlemen, but they don't know the roots of the problem. And as of today, we are kind of fighting blindly, in my personal opinion. We really need to start to share the story, the roots of this crazy migration, because since 2013, those people coming and raise unaccompanied minors is crazy. I went down for a week to serve in one of those detention centers, and I can tell you, I know my people, and I know that many of them, they don't come because they're being targets of gang members. It's just because the situation there is unstable, and we can live there. I'm so grateful that I can live papers, but my people are still suffering. We don't have civil war, but still we are going through a lot of crap. I'm not trying to be polite, but I do appreciate that you guys are the service you do for our community, whatever you do for the rest as well. I do appreciate it. I'm very grateful for whoever is involved in this cause, so taking so long, but I will allow that whoever is attending tonight go back to their communities, to the people they deal with, and please speak up, because whatever the media portrays is not accurate. We have a lot more to do. Thank you.
Thank you. I see 3 in the back, the lady in the back row, then the 2 rows in front, and then we'll make a little semicircle if we can. Merci, sorry, yes. We'll start with the lady in the right.
Hi, my name is Maury. So my parents are both Colombian, but I was born here, but I definitely feel like it's my calling to get into immigration law. Seeing this video, there were so many moments. It was amazing that you guys, thank you so much for, showing us this film today, because not only is it informative and really detailed, it gives you more of a glimpse into the lives of people who are very real. And my parents are both documented. They've been citizens for 30 years, but I still have a very soft spot for seeing stories like this, because even though my parents came here legally and they met in New Jersey, there was a time where even though they came legally with a visa, they stayed over their visa. And seeing stories like this and just knowing what people are going through under the Trump administration, it really hurts. It really hurts. I'm sorry, I'm getting very emotional because I try to think logically, but I really feel like it's my calling to get into immigration law. And I already took the first step. I'm working as a paralegal here in New York. I'm helping survivors of 9/11, so it's not entirely what I want to do because I'm working in personal injury, but I definitely want to go down the immigration path. Now, my question is, besides just showing gratitude and thanking you for having us here today, I wanted to know what opportunities there are for someone to volunteer, for example, with the ACLU, for someone who already has their bachelor's degree, or regardless, it doesn't matter, because if I can talk to other people who might not be as educated and really want to get into the field, I want to know what the next steps are to be able to potentially volunteer for an organization like yours and just really get into this and immerse, because I want to dedicate my life, the rest of my life to this, so I just want to know what the next steps would be and how I can get connected.
Thank you so much. We'll take the 2 other inputs and then we'll revert back to you.
I think, Shamila, you mentioned that, and one of the panelists mentioned that was 2017 and we're 2019. My question is, do you see any trend in the states or the cities picking up a little bit more of the responsibilities than they did in those days, on the one hand? And on the other hand, do you foresee a problem that the courts, which have been protective of DACA and the like, are running into the problem with the Supreme Court, which has changed its balance?
You're talking about the sanctuary city movement,
well,
or in general?
In general, I mean, all these issues will sooner or later come up the chain of the state federal court system. And my question is, do you foresee a major problem when they come to the top in the Supreme Court in its current reconstitution?
Thank you. And the last question we'll take for this round, the gentleman in the back.
Hi everyone, my name is Hanuleva. I have been an immigration activist for the past 6 years, and I just wanted to, this is kind of a shameless plug, but I host the Immigration Life podcast. It's the longest running immigration podcast for the past 3.5 years, where we uplift these stories. And so anybody who's interested in immigration or podcasting, that's another area that I look to create accessibility. So anybody that's interested in that, please come talk to me, and it's at Immigration Life Podcast on Instagram. Thank you. So it's a plug, not a question.
Got it. Well, I have to say, actually, shameless plugs are welcome here. The purpose of this series from the beginning was to bring together diverse groups of people to share information and hopefully get more people informed and involved. So I think with that, there were a number of inputs. Starting with this reflection, how do we get people to think more about root causes? I don't know if that's within your particular sphere of expertise, but please welcome to address it.
So yes, I agree with the first comment, and it wasn't really the subject of the film, but it's the current administration certainly also has in its sights Central Americans, by way of attacks on TPS, which I'm sure you're familiar with, increasing and crackdown on asylum and asylum processes. A lot of individuals coming from El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras are coming here with some variation of gang violence, domestic violence claims concerning asylum that have been seriously curtailed and affected by the current administration. So, and I think the point is very well made that it's not enough part of the narrative that a lot of the root causes for those migrations have been U.S. foreign policy. And there's this, again, not my wheelhouse and not my area of expertise, but certainly there's a general understanding and certainly an effort by the current administration to also cut down on foreign aid to these countries. So it's a real perverse sort of, I don't know the right phrase for it, but just a sort of double attack, both on those who are fleeing these situations that in a lot of ways were prompted by U.S. foreign policy, and then at the same time cutting back on assistance to these countries and addressing the root causes. So I think the point is very well made. In terms of the young woman in the back, I'm happy to give you my card and talk further afterwards. I work in a litigation department, so our work is specialized in the sense that what we do is mainly in courtrooms, but there are definitely other parts of the ACLU that are much more engaged in advocacy and being out there, activism, that kind of work, and I'm happy to connect you with the right people. The question about the courts, yes, it's a very big problem. I mean, the situation, well, first of all, the courts have stopped some of this, so I think there's a way in which the courts have really served to be a check on the administration. But certainly if you follow the Supreme Court, I think we're very hesitant for any sort of big case like this to come up before the Supreme Court, given the current makeup of the court, and that's just the reality that we have right now.
And just to add to that sort of state context, I think that's a great question, because some of the gridlock you see at a national level, the slack is sort of being taken up by state or local jurisdictions in the ambiguity that exists obviously in a federal system. I think there's somewhat of a silver lining or some optimism there, because if you're taking, for example, the whole premise of this movie about in-state tuition and access to education, there are an increasing number of states that have expanded that. I believe there are almost 20 states that offer either in-state tuition or financial assistance to undocumented or DACA students. I think very soon, and these are not just sort of blue states. I think more and more people are, I think in the sphere of undocumented immigrants, if you were to say, dreamers are deserving, if you want to use that term, I think more and more people are open to opening up more opportunities for them. And if they can phrase it in an economic way, then perhaps that's the most palatable way for them to do it. And so in Arkansas, for example, both the House and the Senate there have approved an in-state tuition bill for DACA students, which I hope the governor will sign. But Arkansas is not a very democratic state in the sense of it being, to the left. But there are other states as well. So, for example, I believe in Wisconsin, the governor has made it one of his key or core promises to see that there be an in-state tuition bill in that state as well. So there's glimmers of hope, and whether that will run into conflict with the federal government is yet to be seen.
Thank you. Also, just to the point, the young lady whose parents are Colombian, in all the years of these types of programming, very often people who either themselves or their parents came through legal channels express a kind of resentment towards undocumented people wanting to have their situation regularized. So just on a personal note, I find it wonderful and refreshing to hear you saying that you feel a sense of empathy. And in this city, where we're a city of immigrants, I mean, the point I often would make when people come back with that, well, I did it the right way. Well, the laws were different in 1911.
My husband, his family came here in the late 80s, early 90s. So laws were different in the late 80s, early 90s. I mean, it's a whole new world. And I've had this conversation with my in-laws of, why have you been in the States? I'm an immigrant myself. I came here in the mid-aughts, and we were just talking about it earlier, my father-in-law asked me, you've been here for 10 years, why are you not a resident yet? And my answer, I almost laughed, because just 20 years ago when they did this, it took them maybe a year or two for them to go from having visas to being residents. In 10 years, I, for a number of reasons, could not do what they did in less than 2-3 years.
Thank you.
Can I just ask something?
Yes, but with your permission, I'd just like to get another round of hands first, if anybody else wants to make a comment, question, and then we'll go back to you. Thank you for your patience. Jeff.
Thank you very much. Very powerful, very powerful documentary. I have a emotional response and I guess a rational question. I mean, my emotional response is, having been raised in a very large family, with a number of siblings who have been raised in Georgia and South Carolina, I mean, I'm frankly quite outraged over the fact that this generational racism endures. And of course, with someone like Donald Trump, it's not making it any easier. I'm about ready to, my emotional response to younger members of my family who have voted for Trump is, you're dead unto me. Let's do the Sopranos, sort of like, go fuck yourselves. But that's the emotional response. But the more rational response is that, we need to keep lines of communication open, and we need to have dialogue. But at the same time, I think there is an element for those of us. I don't come from, I don't have experience with immigration personally, but we need to be able to talk to the other side, but honestly, and without compromise. My question, though, is regarding this case before the Supreme Court about the census and the potential impact of this question about citizenship. Is this an important question or not? And how can we explain to the white majority why there's a lawsuit pending before the Supreme Court?
Thank you. And there was a lady.
Hi, I just wanted to ask about where we all can get more information. It was so heartbreaking that young woman would end up in Washington without knowing that she needed to have graduated from Washington schools. I understand it's really complicated, that the situation varies from state to state, and that the DACA program itself has all these. You wouldn't want to describe it to us all because it has many aspects, doesn't it, to qualify. you have to have been a certain age, but where do people go to get information nationally so that you would know which states have which regulations? I understand it's a moving target because the laws keep changing, but is anyone doing this work to make this information readily available with a Google search? Could you perhaps give us some pointers about how to become more informed? I'm a former college professor, and I've had undocumented students in my class, and they need to know things that I have no idea.
Thank you, and we'll let you wanted to.
Thank you for allowing me to speak again, but I just wanted to touch upon what you had said before, what all of you were saying. My parents, like I said, they came in the 70s and they came legally, but then they overstayed their visa and became illegal that route. But in the 80s, it was a very different atmosphere, especially in the early 80s. I just wanted to touch upon that because Reagan was in office, and that's how they became legal, because he granted amnesty to people who came with their visas. Now that we have the Trump administration in office, I thought I considered myself a Republican before this, and I had a lot of friends who were like, you can't be, there's no way, because it just, your ideologies don't match. But in reality, I didn't realize how much I just couldn't identify with the Republican Party until Trump came into office and started just, it seems like, just with the wall, and it's still not enough for him. It's still not enough where he has to fire the Secretary of Homeland Security. That I think recently he did that. So it's still not enough for him. Even the most, and there were several news articles about this where even the most extreme radicalists on the right who concur with his ideas still aren't doing enough for him. He still doesn't feel like it's okay. He needs more. He wants to attack more, and it's just sickening.
Thank you. I mean, just also for a moment to, if we zoom out, this is a phenomenon in most parts of the world today. So whether you want to follow what's happening in some parts of Europe, in different countries in Asia, in all continents, there's this dynamic. So, I mean, Trump is a very compelling figure because of so many reasons that we know, but we need to think, why are these messages so appealing to so many millions of people around the world, regardless of their background? But thank you for bringing that personal context. Those questions about the census and where to get informed.
I can answer the more technical question about the census. So what's at stake is basically a repression of response rates to the census. The census does a lot of things for the government in general. It decides, you know, what gets funded and where, how much money gets allocated to different jurisdictions. But it's not the only place that you get the information about citizenship. And so the administration's argument that it's necessary to protect the Voting Rights Act isn't quite, I don't want to say truthful, but it's not quite accurate, right? It's you know, playing with words a little bit. The main data set that we use, the American Community Survey, as well as the Current Population Survey, which is done every month by the US Census Bureau, asks the question about citizenship. The census is there as, you know, a 10-year check-in on that and to recalibrate the weighting, which I'm not going to get into, but it isn't the only means by which you get information about citizenship. So the fact that you would, and this estimate about how many millions of people would likely not answer the census because of this question, which is, I believe, several million, around 5 million, something like that, is a significant amount of people. And if you think about, you know, who would be affected, or who are the groups of people who are most likely to not respond because of it, it's people of color, people of lower income, and immigrants. And so these are, and especially for certain states and certain cities and jurisdictions, this is a large part of their population. And so there's a lot of stake for millions of people, not just the people in these communities that feel that they shouldn't answer the census because of this, but, you know, people who just live in their general area. And so that's what I would say to people who think that it doesn't affect them. As a researcher, to have your main source of data to be suddenly, how less accurate it is also worrying. A lot of the work that we do to sort of shed new light on immigrants in the United States comes from that. And to think that for 10 years, basically, you'll have data that is less accurate, even though it didn't have to be, is really frustrating.
Thank you. To the question about information.
Sure, I don't have a great sort of go-to place for everything. I know here in New York, something that I often use, but this is for legal services, is the New Americans Hotline, and what they do is referrals to pro bono or low bono legal services, but this is just on the legal question. When you're asking about DACA and state benefits, that's much more complicated, and so you really do have to look state by state. I don't know if you know of any centralized repository of information.
I always get this acronym wrong. It's the National Coalition? Or
New York Immigration Coalition.
No, sorry, it's of state legislatures. It's NSLC, I think, or no, I always get this wrong. It's something National C, state legislatures. They have a tracker for immigration-related policies at a state and local level. And they're quite active in tracking it. So I assume that they would have it broken down by different populations or different kinds of policies, but that would be my best guess to where you should go.
Well, it's probably too ambitious, but since with Indocumentales we are working with K-12 programming and a number of teacher programs, as Omar mentioned at the beginning, maybe we can try and see if there's a way that we could support that or find some links. Are there any last burning questions? You've all been generous with your time on a Saturday evening, and I think we can continue the discussion outside. Please, madam, that will be the last question for tonight.
So hi, good evening. My name is Jessica, and I just want to take the time and honor the 3 individuals that participated in this film. I am also a DACA recipient, and it's taken me 13 years to actually earn my bachelor's degree, and this will be my final year. So I am feeling very, very good about that, and just like watching films like this remind me of the struggle that I've been through. There were several moments, actually a lot of moments during the film where I just like poured my eyes out, and it's good to see a reflection of my struggle in other individuals because it reminds me that I'm not alone. It's also good to see these type of films because other people get informed and they realize that there's much more going on than just like people walking by on a daily basis. So thank you to the filmmakers, to the individuals that were participating, and I'm interested to know if what is the outcome of these 3 individuals in the future, if the filmmakers are interested of like, I don't know, getting back to them and just seeing what they plan to do in the future. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being here and sharing a little bit of your story with us. Pilar, do we know anything about the director's plans for the future, or could we?
I know that they're currently working on another film. It's not attached to these 3 individuals. One of the filmmakers was actually in New York this weekend, and we really very badly wanted her to be able to be here, but she had to go back to LA a couple hours before the screening, which was frustrating because these are the questions we love to ask the filmmakers, and they can tell us more about these individuals because they've developed, they were filming over the course of 4 years, so they developed really close relationships with them. Unfortunately, I wish I had more information.
We are about to refurbish the Indocumentales website, which will have a more straightforward way of staying in touch and asking follow-up questions. And to the point that was raised before, we know that many of you who come to these events are here because you're also, it either affects you personally or you're working in areas that are connected. So we love for people to stay involved, and the beauty of the documentaries is that, again, the people featured also go on to do really interesting things. So if we can play a little role in helping to keep that going, we're happy to do so. Could I please ask for a warm round of applause? For our wonderful team from NYU. My name is Shamina de Gonzaga. Thank you for being here, and see you outside.